Welcome back. Dai-Shihan Miller here from Warrior Concepts in the Mori no Todo Dojo. And we're here with this week's Whiteboard Wednesday. So for those of you who tried to catch the live event, for those of you who missed that, no big deal, right? But the technical issues made it impossible to edit that or work with anything. So we're just going to do it fresh this way. So if you're confused as to why this isn't in the live section with the rest of them, that's why. So we just adapt and overcome and keep on going, right? All right, so the theme, the topic for this week is taking a look at the Kukan, right? This space of potential. Hatsumi Sensei has talked about this from the time I got started in 1980, right? So this idea of Kukan, which is conventionally translated as space, right? I tend to call it space of potential, right? Because as you'll see as we move along, we're going to be talking about opportunities, okay? And creating them, whatever, okay? But what we're going to focus on today is defining the Kukan. What is it exactly? And it's going to look different in different situations, right? We want to look at the fact that it's kind of a living, breathing thing, right? I know it's kind of odd to think about air and space between, you and something else, right? As something that's living and breathing and whatnot, but we'll talk about that. And we'll also, for reference, right, I'm going to be making reference to things like Tai Sabaki and things like that. So you're going to want to go back and take a look at the previous Whiteboard Wednesday lessons in that area, okay? All right, so Kukan is a very, very important aspect in our training, right? It shows up as an important principle across several lineages. Sometimes it's in individual kata, sometimes it's the whole lineage, right? So a couple of examples, right? The feeling in Koku, right? The first kata on the first scroll in the Gyoko school, right? Koku can mean tiger sky, it can mean false void, that kind of thing, right? Of course, there's a physical, what you're doing kind of thing, right? There's a mental strategy, right? But there's this feeling that goes along with it, right? And this feeling, this experience that you're having, right, is, as the scrolls say, to play in space, right? Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, we need an understanding of the Kukan to understand what that is, right? In the Koto school, right, the kata yokto, right, to scoop up and throw or scoop up and toss, right? And again, in Koto Ryu, they focus on and talk about the kuraidori. So again, whichever direction you need to go to get back to that episode on the Tai Sabaki and, or in this case, the kuraidori, right? You can take a look at that lesson, right? So Yokuto, again, the feeling in Yokuto is to find the way, right? So it still implies, right, playing around and adjusting and whatnot inside this bubble, right, to understand or to find the way, right, the path to get this person, right? I would say that our art is, or our taijutsu, our combat side is like dancing, right? You let him lead, right, because he'll show you the way, right? And then you can do what you need to do, right? Kind of like dancing, except that our bad guy, or the bad guy always falls down, or our partner always falls down. So anyway, in the Togakure school and the Shinden Fudo Ryu, right? Shinden Fudo school, both of these lineages in general, right? The whole principle is to find the way, to find the most natural way to make things happen, right? For the Togakure school, that was kind of summed up in Takamasa Sensei's poem, Kajiwaraku, right? The Wildflowers in the Meadow. And once you do a deep dive in there and take a look at what's really going on, right? The whole idea is, right? There's this idea of bending when there's wind, bending to the degree that the wind exists, not bending if it doesn't, that kind of thing, right? So it's kind of that going with the flow kind of thing, right? Anyway, so let's, what I like to do when we're looking at a concept like this, especially if you're not native Japanese or even Chinese where you can look into these things, right? What I want to do is take a look at the kanji used to write the word, and this can start to lead us in a certain direction, right? It's really important, okay? So Kukan is actually made up of two parts, okay? Ku and kan, okay? So ku, right, and kan. Hopefully you can see that on your side, right? Kukan, right? So ku is written with this kanji, right? Ku, right? So ku can mean like empty air, empty space, right? It can reference the sky. There's this idea of shunya, right? Emptiness, the lack of kind of an immutable, intrinsic nature within anything, right? I mean, we'll keep this simple, right? Think about a ball of clay, right? You can mold that clay and turn it into anything you want until you put it in the oven and you fire it, you bake it, and then it becomes a set form, right? So ku, the idea of ku is this, as Hatsumi Sensei has always described it, a state of zero, right? And it's empty of any given nature, right? What we're really looking at is potential, okay? Let me just shift my camera here just a little bit because I think it's a little off level. Well, maybe that'll fix it, okay? So, so again, what I want to look at here is this idea of, what else do we have here with this? Oh, and the void, right? This void idea, right? Void, not void like empty, but like devoid of a set kind of thing, right? It's open. It has lots of potential, right? Like a baby, lots of potential. There's a saying that every man is born as many men, but dies as just one. And what that means is the experiences and knowledge and all that kind of stuff that shapes them over life, the all the possibilities, right? They're just not open anymore, okay? So anyway, so void, right? And in kan, the kanji for kan is actually includes the kanji for a gate, right? Kind of like in jutsu, but what's in here is different, right? So in this case, right? So kan can mean space also, but it's the space between things, like a gap, right? It's an interval, a distance, that kind of thing, right? It can also refer to time, right? Like a time interval or a pause or a break, that kind of thing, right? There's a span, right? Time span, temporal or spatial, a stretch, a period, that kind of thing. There's a relationship between and among, right? It can also mean members, like of an organization or a group or whatever, like the Bujinkan, right? That kind of thing, right? So anyway, what we're going to focus on here is this idea of a gap, okay? A gap, right? So there's this idea of openness or emptiness where anything's possible, right? And there's a gap. There's an interval in time. There's a gap between objects, whatever, okay? Okay, so we have this? Yes, awesome. Okay, so kan also, for those of you in ninjutsu and not from outside, a little historical tidbit, right? Kan is also an alternate historical name for ninja. Okay, there were lots of names like kusha, which means grass, and all kinds of things, right? But kan referred to kind of the activities of ninja as information gatherer or spy, right? So kan, gap, right? Remember, society was made of wood and paper and all that. So as things got weathered and all that, they swelled, they shrunk, all that kind of stuff, and gaps kind of formed because things weren't as precise as maybe engineering and builders and things like that today, right? So ninja would peer through these gaps, right? And listen to conversations, watch relationships, see who's visiting, that kind of thing, right? So a nickname for ninja, and actually the word ninja is actually relatively new, right? But one of the historical references, right, was this idea of kan, a gap, right? And it wasn't about them being a gap, right? Although they were also, right, in society, right, kind of filling in and paying attention to what was going on, right, and taking advantage of perceptual gaps that people have. Because things look a certain way, then it must be that way, and because that's, right, that there's this assumption that people make, there's a gap in their perception. They're not really paying attention, they're assuming, okay? So we need to be careful with that as well. All right, so the plan today is to kind of take a look at an initial Kukan, right? How to recognize it, how to create it, right? To also take a look at a couple of forms of Kukan within the interaction, right? And then I'll give you a couple of ways, three ways to create a Kukan to establish that initial safe distance between you and them. And that's really what we're looking at in the beginning, right? Establishing an initial safe distance. It's one of the first lessons I got from my teachers in this art, right? And the whole idea is if you control the distance, you control the fight, right? But if you can recognize things happening and moving and opportunities and whatnot without having to left brain it, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, it's just the experience. Okay, so we've got our attacker, big guy, right? Defender, not necessarily that way. It could be defender, attacker. It doesn't really matter. So first thing that I was taught was how to define the Kukan, right? What space do we need to be paying attention to, right? What's the only thing that matters in the context of a survival situation, okay? So this is gonna be an oddly shaped thing. I often call it the bubble. So if you ever hear me talk about bubble, that's what I'm talking about, right? So the bubble goes from the top of the defender's head, top of my head, to the top of his head, right? From there to the ground. The ground is another index point, right? So that's how tall it is, right? Different points, right? And then we want to take a look at from just outside. I'll show this in a different way too. Just outside my shoulders to just outside his shoulders. This way, this is the width. So it would actually more closely look. Let's make an attacker here that's pointing at us. He's all in his juke out position right here, right? So we have the ground thing, right? In this case, you know, that kind of thing, right? So from the top of the head to the ground, and then from just outside his shoulders to just outside my shoulders. So that's what matters. If we're talking about multiple attackers, because I heard that question coming, right? Then we got multiple attackers here, right? So it's just outside the shoulder, the far outside shoulder, for the farthest guy in this direction, to just outside his shoulder, right? To just outside mine. So now it's more of a cone, right? And from top of head to top of heads. We control that bubble, all right? So this is what matters. So, but this becomes important as well, right? This space between, right? One of the things we teach our students in Mod 1 is how to establish initial safe distance. What we normally do is have the attacker stick their hands out and then pull back into their fight position, right? This is not about what the bad guy is really going to do on the street. This is so the defender can learn how far somebody can reach based on their height, generally speaking, right? So we want to be just almost able to touch, but not quite. So we're not getting lazy about it. We're not taking it, you know, for granted or whatever. We're understanding this. So later on, we know, right? We know where the edge of that Kukan is, right? So we've got these two bodies, right? We're looking down on top of them. We got defender, we got attacker, right? There's this space in here that we want to maintain. At a very, very, very base level, what I want you to think about is this is your first lesson in defending against a jab or a quick speed attack, right? Because we're just out of range, right? A jab is designed to get us to flinch or pull or duck or bob or weave or whatever so we can get us with that next thing, right? So if I'm standing just far enough away and he can't reach me anyway, I'm less likely to flinch or fall for psych outs or those kind of things, okay? So we want to pay attention to this, right? There's two big mistakes that students make when they're working with each other, right? One is when they're doing grappling kind of things. And I don't care if it's a single hand grab, double grab, kumyuch, whatever, right? Is the attacker will often grab way out here, right? Or way out here, okay? It's not grabbing distance, right? That's punching distance. So I'll look at, if this guy's got this long reach, right? I'll tell this guy, because he's having problems being able to execute the throw or break balance or whatever. Well, the reach, right? So this guy needs to be told, just punch him, just kick him. You're at punching or kicking distance, okay? So the flip side of this is for punching or kicking, right? This guy will be standing just a little too close, and then, you know, I walk over and I tell him, do you know what I would do if I were him? I'd kick you right in the groin, or I'd punch you right in the throat. But that's not the attack. It doesn't matter what the attack is. You're standing close enough that this guy doesn't have to throw this thing that the scrolls say he should be throwing, right? I'm controlling this to force him to attack me the way I'm comfortable, the way I'm ready, not the way he wants to do it, right? My job, this is not a sport event. My job is not to win or lose, and that's the problem where most people think, right? Win, lose, whatever, right? It's not about winning and losing. It's about surviving. So my goal isn't to win, right? I mean, if I negotiate this thing and we both go home safely, I count that as a win, right? But it's not winning conventionally, like I'm always dropping the guy or whatever, right? My job is not to win. We need to rearrange our perspective so we can look at this as my job is to make his intention to beat, break, or kill me, right? My job is to make his job as difficult as possible, okay? At trying to do that thing that he wants to do, right? If I can do that, everything's good, all right? So that's defining it, right? Recognizing it, right? There's a couple of things that we need to be paying attention to, right? One is off that initial safe surroundings, right? Or initial safe distance, right? So first one is just the initial safe distance, okay? He or she who controls the distance controls the fight, okay? Number two, right? There's spaces. What we need to do is look for the spaces or the gaps in our techniques, right? What this looks like is, let's say I'm doing a kata, ichimonji no kata, right? So he punches, I step back into ichimonji, I deliver a counter strike, I do something to unbalance him, I take the fight to him. In this case, it's that omote-shuto to the head, and then when he falls, I either back away or I move in and lock him up and restrain, okay? So we've got these moves, right? The gaps we're looking at is there's spaces between as I'm moving to kamae and I deliver the counter strike, right? From the counter strike, moving through space to hit the next target or to throw him off balance or whatever, there's this gap, right? That nothing is happening, right? I mean, I'm moving in, but I'm not making contact with him, right? I've broken his balance, but there's space between that balance breaking and the actual landing of the shot, right? There's a space as he's getting knocked back or falling to the ground, and right, I'm moving in to get that restraint or that lock or hold, right? All of these are opportunities. Let me tell you a little story. First seminar I ever went to in this art, right? I had already had lots of other martial arts experience, and so some was free flow kind of stuff, but by and large, a lot of it was kata based, right? So step by step by step. There's only one official way to do things, that kind of thing. So this is the mindset that I had going into the training. Okay, so first seminar, we're working on this technique. I believe it was called Shihodori, right? Shihodori is a Moguri Gata in the Kukishinden school, all right? So the teacher demonstrated the technique, right? So moving back against one or two incoming things, so we neutralize those. We move in and punch the upper arm and then move in to do this onikudaki kind of thing, take the guy down, whatever, right? So I actually got teamed up working with one of the black belts, okay? So he's attacking, and I'm trying my best to do this technique, and he's helping out and all that, right? And then it's my turn to be the attacker. So I throw an attack, right? And he shifts back, neutralizes the punches, but on the way to hitting the upper arm to get the onikudaki, right? He clips my ribs, right? And then as he gets of course, my mind is like, wait a minute, that's not what the teacher showed, right? As he's catching the omote gyaku, or the onikudaki, he knees the inside of my knee, right? Destabilizes me, takes me down, and I stand up. The first thing I said was, that and the knee, that's not in the kata. He said, the kata doesn't say that, right? Yeah, it doesn't say that, because we had written descriptions of the kata, right? Yeah, it doesn't say that. He says, yeah, it also doesn't say that I can't do it. And here's the lesson. If you're going to pass by something, why waste time? Just take advantage of it and hit it, okay? So here was my first lesson in taking advantage to the gaps in the middle. Just because a kata is written a certain way, right? They're key points, they're bullet points, right? It doesn't say that you can't do anything else as long as those things help everything else that's happening and keeps the technique moving in the same direction, right? People that are very, very left-brained, very this way or that way, on or off, whatever, I had a difficult time with this, right? It took a long time in training for my brain to kind of expand and become a way where when I look at something, I can see multiple avenues at the exact same time. And one more, right? So we've got this thing here, right? And then the other one, right, is in gaps in perception, right? So perceptual gaps, right? So this is gaps in his thinking. right? So what ends up happening is if I can catch him with confusion, all that wonderful stuff, right? Confusion, surprise, whatever, and his brain locks up, right? If I do something up top and then go down below and get his brain to go down there, there's a perceptual gap where he's paying attention to one thing, and that means that other things are open, right? So if I can lead his consciousness around, if I can lead his brain around and have it just like a magician with misdirection, if I can have him looking or paying attention in one area while I'm busy doing something in another, can't stop me, right? Everything that I do to him, to his brain processing, seems like it's coming out of nowhere, but nothing comes out of nowhere. But to him, if I'm using these perceptual gaps, it does, right? So gaps create space, they create time, right? And I want to be able to use those things, okay? So the initial safe distance, right? That's that, if I can maintain that, right? In a minute here, I'm going to give you 3 different ways to maintain that initial safe distance so he has more work to do to get at you, right? That's where we need to start. The gaps in our techniques, right? So we're recognizing these gaps within the techniques, right? Between moves, what happens if we're too close, too far, the space needed for each strike, right? When we're delivering a strike, what's the distance that's needed? So I need to know whether it's a lead, a cross, or I can do a lunge. How much space do I need, right? To actually have power in that kick or that strike that I'm doing, right? What strike or move, what it does to him. Startle response, flinch, surprise, all that kind of stuff, okay? Cool. All right, so let's jump over to taking a look at ways to create that initial safe distance. Remember the first 2 pictures I had here with the big bad guy and the shorter defender, right? Again, it's whatever you end up with, right? This is not a sporting event where they're going to team you up size for size, weight for weight, skill for skill, age. No. Just assume if you're defending yourself in a survival situation, right? This jackwagon has cut you from the herd and you're at a serious disadvantage. If you think any other way, right? As Hatsumi Sensei's always said, and he actually wrote an article with this title, right? Pride goes before the fall. So be careful what you think is true, right? Especially when you don't know anything about that other person other than right now, they intend to hurt you. That's all you know. Well, that and your emotional state about that, okay? And cocky is not an emotional state, right? It's a delusional state, okay? So 3 ways to create the Kukan. Okay, 3 ways to create the Kukan. All right, 1 is with our Ashi Sabaki. There's also a Sabaki. I passed Whiteboard Wednesday on this, right? Right now, I'm just going to use the conventional translation that most people do, footwork, okay? But it really means leg management, that kind of thing, right? So footwork, Ashi Sabaki, right? So we're moving to keep that space between he and I. Every time he moves toward me, I move back, so I maintain that bubble, right? It can get bigger, but it can't get smaller. If it gets smaller, he gets to jump on you, right? So Ashi Sabaki, and also, okay, so our Taihan, our body movement, right? Technically, walking is Taihan. It's part of the body movement skills. But what we're looking at here is using rolling, leaping, break falls, those kind of things, right? If he's really pressing in and my footwork's not enough, he keeps closing, right? I can do a roll away that creates 2, 3, 4 times the amount of distance, resets him to 0, and he now needs to close the gap in and reestablish what he just lost. Leaping doesn't create as much, but it can at least double the distance that you have, so it opens that thing up again. Taihan, break falls, like if I do a tachi nagare, yoko nagare, that kind of thing, right? It's not about distance from his body so much as it's taking advantage of a different space, right? So if he's punching in here and I drop below all that, right? I have a whole bunch of extra targets down here low from his groin down because I'm underneath, right? He's going to have a hard time fighting. Human beings have a hard time working above shoulder level and below shoulder level or below hip level because it's just not the way we're built, right? We need to do all these kind of things. So if I can drop into that pocket, into that space, right? Again, confusion, disorientation, surprise, all that kind of stuff, but it gives me more opportunities because he thought the fight was going on up here, right? And then the third one, right, is by attacking or threatening to attack, right? I won't use the Japanese this time, right? So by attacking or threatening to attack, right? So he starts moving in, right? Maybe I'm in a Seigan or whatever. He starts to get a little too close, right? And I get out there and stab at his eyes, or I spit at him or whatever, right? Anything that's going to cause him to want to back up to save some part of himself, right? Or maybe I'm in a Hoko or Kosei, Bobi, whatever, right? And he starts getting closer. Remember, the leading edge of each person's body is not this part, unless you're in Shizen or Hira, right? If we're in a fight position, the leading edge is the closest thing that's out there. So another big mistake that students make is they're paying attention to this on them and the other person. Meanwhile, the limbs are inside the Kukan. The rule of the Kukan is you never put anything in there you're not willing to give up for the rest of your life. So if his hand drifts close enough for me to comfortably smack at those fingers or the hand bones, or as he's moving and I lift a lead kick toward his groin or whatever, that causes him to back up, you're only going to need to do it 2, maybe 3 times for him to now not want to get close enough. And again, you're forcing him to come in from that distance, right? Okay, so there's your 3 ways to create it in a self-defense situation. I'm going to give you 2 bonus ones right now, right? First bonus is through projection of intention, presence, that kind of thing, right? In life, 2, okay? So one of the things I was taught very early on is the primary goal of a ninja is to set up their lives so that no one would ever see them as a target. No one would ever think of attacking them. And it's not about bravado. It's not about walking around like they better not. Dude, they can run you over with a car or shoot you from across the street, right? You're not indestructible, okay? But the idea is to carry yourself in a way where you become someone that no one thinks of attacking, okay? So the other way to do this, short of that, right, is to increase awareness of surroundings so that you can act before the threat gets close enough to you, right? So when you go into places, you establish baselines, all that kind of stuff, right? So it becomes more and more difficult for anybody to get at you, okay? Bonus number 2 is, again, use in life, right? Relationships, work or business, whatever, right? Where you're looking for those opportunities to take advantage of things where maybe something needs to be done, but nobody's really paying attention to it, right? And so you can use that to increase benefit, that kind of thing. In business, it's done all the time where a good entrepreneur looks for a gap or a need that's not being filled that would make people's lives easier. And so when they put that out, that's why when you see it, you go, oh my God, that would, right? Because they're not making something and convincing you to buy it, right? They're recognizing a need and then creating something that fills that need, right? Anyway, that's the thing. That's what I want to cover for this week's Whiteboard Wednesday. So hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them below, or you can shoot us an email at warriorc@warriorconceptsonline.com. Also, don't forget that we have the Friday virtual class coming up that we'll be doing physical techniques, right? To take a look at this stuff much more deeply. This is the stuff we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be looking at gaps inside techniques. We're going to be looking at that spatial gap creation, that kind of thing, right? Also, for those of you who have been following that and jumping on those classes, in case you missed it, you'll see the link on the information page when you go there. We now have a full-on program where instead of doing it a la carte 1 class at a time, you can sign up for the Ninpo Masterclass program and get 8 live classes a month, coaching, questions answered, all that kind of stuff. Plus, if you get started here pretty soon, fairly soon, it's not going to be up for much longer. I threw in an extra $1,300 worth of training programs and whatnot that you can take advantage of. But again, it's up to you, right? You're in control of your training. So if it works for you, great. But why would you not take advantage of something, especially once you see the tuition cost, right? You can do it monthly, or you can get an even bigger savings by signing up for a year. Anyway, I'll talk to you next time. Be safe. You know the next step. Add it into your training or get signed up for Friday's class. Talk to you soon.